Question is, what happened? It's a fair question. I think the way that I would begin to frame an answer to what happened is by remembering that I lost the plot. And I mean that literally. I couldn't follow the plot when I went to the movies. And the movies have been really a lifeline for me for as long as I can remember. I first went to the movies, I suppose I was about 7 years of age, and I was transported. And the movies have been a core part of my life ever since. And there have been times in my life, even when I've earned my living through my knowledge of the movies. And by that, I mean very particularly classic Hollywood cinema from the 30s through the 50s. Came a time in my drinking when I could sit in a cinema for somewhere to be, for something to do for a couple of hours. And I found that I could not follow the plot. That was disaster, obviously. That was a complete disaster for me. But a clear metric, if you like, sort of how ill I was. But of course, it wasn't just at the movies that I'd lost the plot. I'd lost the plot of my life. My life was in a mess, and I personally was terminally frustrated. I could come to grips with nothing except the next drink. And really, everything in my life had turned into an alibi, a kind of alibi for that next drink. So I'd sit in bars, hiding behind the newspaper, and as the morning progressed, of course, the print would start falling off the corner of the newspaper. But the newspaper was an alibi. It wasn't that I was there so much to have a drink. I was there to read the paper. Oh, and incidentally, have a drink while I was at it. So that was a real problem that I had become terminally frustrated with my life, but too stubborn to give up. So I reached that place that where people talk about being sick and tired of being sick and tired and losing the plot. So what did I do? I had to do something. Well, I did a lot of somethings, and many of them didn't work out. And it came to the point where the something that I had to do, the first thing that I had to do is I had to leave Ireland. I had to leave the country where I grew up, where I was born, where I was educated, where I had had something of a career in public life, where, the vast majority of my friends were, and so on and so forth. But in Ireland, I was surrounded by a toxic mix of acceptance of alcoholic behavior up to a point. Now, that point was never actually very clearly defined, but you certainly knew it as soon as you crossed that line. Because that's where all the scapegoating came in. That's where all the shaming came in. That's where all the disowning came in. And essentially, you crossed that line and you were thrown to the wolves. Now, the wolves I was thrown to were very civilized wolves. I don't say anything to the contrary of that, but they were wolves nonetheless. And I couldn't do it. I knew I could not sober up and rebuild a life in Ireland. And in that, I think I'm probably not alone. We have very specific characteristics of generational shame in Ireland. We have a very difficult colonial history. Of course, there's the important occasion of the Great Famine of the mid-19th century, and we've carried the trauma of that for generations. And for a dispossessed people, what we had left in some respects was our alcohol. and our social life around the pub. And the city where I grew up, Dublin, of course, much of our early economy was based on Guinness's brewery. I couldn't do it. So I came here to the United States where I found some real acceptance. And when I called up the recovery center at Mercy Hospital in Portland, Maine, I was greeted by this fabulous American response. Come on in and get some of this recovery. And I really warmed to that. I understood that. That's like, sort of the carnival barker. I could relate to that. And that's where I first found acceptance. I found acceptance of me, just as who I showed up to be. And then I found acceptance by me. And I came to love myself and to allow myself to love myself. And in due course, and this is the point where I am right now, I came to be bored by my own war stories. And I saw that as a milestone in recovery. Really, I'm bored by my war stories, and you're going to be bored by them too. You hear one of my war stories, well, you heard it 1,000 times before. What I'm interested in now and in my life and in moving forward is what is this recovery? That's where I'm at today.